Amid the current slurry of mobile phone garbage designed to con kids and gullible adults comes a game that harks back to a time when arcades were the primary method for fleecing gamers. Thankfully, the value proposition for Shredder's Revenge is fair and breathtakingly simple. You pay £20 and you get a beautifully designed retro beat-em-up that takes all the elements of the games it's based upon, refines their combat, adds more characters to play, more enemies to fight, allows for 6-player co-op, and wraps all the action in an original soundtrack that, while harking back to the early 90s, stands on its own as a work of art. Seriously, I needed this game at this moment. We've strayed so far from the core concept of moment-to-moment fun in pursuit of loot boxes, progression unlocks, and the next level up that I sometimes wonder why I'm playing games at all. Shredder's Revenge reminds us that we play games to have fun, not to level up or get the next shiny skin, and for that alone it deserves a medal. Of course, I'm under no illusions that a big part of the enjoyment is nostalgia based. I have a fondness for the Turtles and for this style of game. Side-scrolling beat-em-ups were a staple of the arcades in the late 80s, early 90s when I grew up, and I played them all. Golden Axe, Final Fight, the Turtles arcade, the Simpsons video game, and this ubiquity followed us home to the consoles, peaking for me with Streets of Rage and its sequels on the Mega Drive. But nostalgia only goes so far when it comes to these retro remakes. The recent Streets of Rage 4 being a case in point for me. It had the graphical style, soundtrack, gameplay that should be catnip for a middle-aged gamer like myself, but for whatever reason it didn't grip me beyond the first few stages. Something was missing, and it's the thing that Shredder's Revenge has in spades. It's simply fun from start to finish. There's just enough difference between each of the characters that it's possible to pick a favourite beyond the design and personality alone. Donatello is slow and not the strongest, but he has the best reach with his bow staff. Michelangelo is fast. Raphael is powerful, Leonardo is obviously the all-rounder. Aficionados of the arcade will argue that there were differences between the four originally, but they didn't really play that differently. In Shredder's Revenge they are unambiguously different, which adds to the variety and replay value. Splinter joins them, doing that Kung Fu or Jedi Master thing of walking with his cane until he springs into action, along with ace reporter April O'Neil, who redresses the balance in terms of the lack of kick-ass female characters in the franchise. It also makes perfect sense that she's now a ninja too, since if she's been hanging around with the Turtles for the past 40 years, she would have picked up a thing or two. Fighting with a microphone and the occasional camera tripod as a very effective club, her design embodies the fun of the original cartoon, which was always a thoroughly goofy affair, with characters like April's best friend Irma bumbling about and the rival reporter Vernon getting into scrapes. There was literally nothing of the original Eastman and Laird comic or even the Turtles movie in that stereotypically bonkers Saturday morning kids cartoon, and it's this tone that the game hopes to reproduce with its ridiculous plot, if you can even call it that. Honestly, it's just an excuse to visit locations and encounter series staples like the Triceratons were encountered in a dinosaur exhibit. None of this gaudy nostalgia porn would work, however, if the core mechanics weren't tight and the combat satisfying. Tribute games have found the sweet spot between giving the player more options across the board, with several ways of throwing enemies, for instance, new moves like somersaults that dovetail into sliding kicks, without going overboard and overcomplicating matters. There are no counters, for instance. The concept of counters wasn't even a thing at the time such beat-em-ups were a fixture in arcades, and dodging hits was a question of knowing when to move out of range, jump up the screen, or end a combo because the enemy in question would get a sneaky hit in if you kept going. I'm not sure if this even has a name, but I've called it chip damage. The rank and file enemies are generally no match for you, but what they do is get in the occasional hit here and there, and beyond the bosses that was generally how you could lose in such games. This is a thing in Shredder's Revenge, except it feels less cheap. With many more tools in your arsenal, you can avoid those hits more readily, and they feel less like arcade cheese designed to encourage more 50p's. The variety of enemies is huge, and each level seems to add one or two new ones. There's much less of the palette swapping present in games of its ilk. Generally, a differently coloured foot ninja will come with a new weapon or behaviour that forces you to change your strategy. Sword guys who can block indefinitely, guys who jump backwards and throw shurikens to stop you immediately jumping after them, mouser droids that pin you, allowing their allies to put the boot in. There's a good deal of strategizing needed to clear the screen of enemies at times. Unless you're playing 6-player, of course, in which case the game becomes an explosion of sound and fury, signifying fun but very little tactics or strategy. The option to do so is simply there for fun, and because in 2022 we're not constrained by the size of the cabinet or the number of kids in the arcade with pocket money to hand. And there are nods to what people expect, like a little bit of progression, extra health here and there, and the ability to use your specials a little bit more. But it's not central to the gameplay at all. It's more flavour, and I think more of a reflection of the fact that people do want something. They want that little carrot, but I appreciate the fact that you don't need to level up to get through the game at all. There are extra modes like the arcade mode that asks you to go through without dying. It's a little bit tougher. You can unlock an extra character. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but you don't have to be a genius to figure that out if you have even a passing familiarity with the Turtles. The art style is totally on point, with the intro being a particular highlight, the cover of the theme song probably being the best I've heard, walking the line between homage and beat for beat reproduction. Likewise, the soundtrack throughout is great, with the song from the Panic in the Sky level being the trigger for me grabbing the soundtrack. I feel like breathing a sigh of relief. A game that is just fun from start to finish, all about mechanics and moment-to-moment satisfaction for the player. If you, like me, have started to become a bit jaded by video games in recent years, and you're also of a certain age, then I would encourage you to give Shredder's Revenge a go. It will go some way to renewing your faith in an industry plagued by greed dressed up as game mechanics. For me, Shredder's Revenge has reminded me why I play games in the first place.